Clara Sanders sat comfortably in the back seat of Daniel's sleek black SUV, her manicured nails tapping rhythmically on her phone screen, as the car rolled smoothly through the bustling streets of Westbury. The city was alive with people going about their business, oblivious to the silent dramas unfolding in the cars and offices around them. Clara, with her long, straightened hair cascading over her shoulders and her crimson lips curved in a perpetual smirk, was the embodiment of confidence and self-assuredness. She was Daniel's mistress, and she wore that title with pride, flaunting her position with a kind of arrogance that knew no bounds. Clara had always believed she was destined for wealth and power, and being with Daniel, a wealthy businessman, was proof that she was on the right path. His luxurious car, his grand estate, and his influence in Westbury were all markers of her success, or so she believed. As the car glided to a stop at a red light, Clara's gaze drifted out of the tinted window, where her eyes caught sight of a woman walking alone along the cracked pavement. The woman wore a simple floral dress, her posture straight, and her head held high despite the modesty of her attire. Her hair was neatly pulled back, and there was a gracefulness to her stride that seemed almost out of place amidst the hustle of the city. Clara squinted, her perfectly lined eyes narrowing with judgment as she took in the woman's appearance. There was something about her, something Clara couldn't quite place, that irked her. Perhaps it was the woman's quiet dignity, the way she moved as if she were above the chaos around her, untouched by the grime of the city. Clara's lips curled into a sneer as she leaned forward, tapping the driver's shoulder. "Stop the car," she commanded, her voice sharp and unyielding. The driver hesitated for a moment, glancing at her through the rear-view mirror before nodding and pulling the car to the curb. Clara didn't wait for the car to come to a full stop before she swung the door open and stepped out, her heels clicking against the pavement with an authority that demanded attention. Pedestrians glanced her way, some pausing to take in the sight of the well-dressed woman emerging from the luxury vehicle. Clara thrived on the attention, her chin lifting slightly as she approached the woman on the sidewalk. "You," she called out, her voice slicing through the noise of the street. The woman turned, her expression calm and unruffled, as if Clara's presence was nothing more than a slight breeze on an otherwise pleasant day. This only fueled Clara's irritation. "I saw you staring," she continued, her heels clicking with each step she took forward. "You were eyeing Daniel's car, weren't you? Envying what you can't have." Clara's smile was cruel, her eyes glimmering with satisfaction as she waited for the woman to respond. The woman blinked once, then twice, before offering a small, polite smile. "I was only admiring the car," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "It's quite beautiful." Clara's eyes flashed with contempt as she stepped closer, her expensive perfume filling the air between them. "Of course it is," she purred, her voice dripping with condescension. "But people like you could never understand what it takes to own something like this. It's not just about money, it's about status, power, influence. Things you clearly know nothing about." Clara's words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate, designed to wound. But to her frustration, the woman did not flinch. Her calm gaze remained fixed on Clara, her expression unchanged. The lack of reaction only served to deepen Clara's scorn. "Do you even know who I am?" she demanded, folding her arms across her chest. The woman shook her head slowly, her eyes never leaving Clara's face. "No," she replied simply, her tone polite but distant. "Should I?" The question, though asked innocently, struck Clara like a slap. Her eyes narrowed, and her lips pressed into a thin line. "You will," she snapped, grabbing the woman's arm with a force that belied her manicured appearance. Without waiting for a response, Clara yanked the woman towards the car, her grip unyielding as she propelled her forward. "Get in," she commanded, her voice brooking no argument. The woman stumbled slightly, but caught her balance, her expression still calm, almost serene, as if Clara's outburst was merely a gust of wind ruffling her dress. This infuriated Clara further, her grip tightening as she shoved the woman into the back seat of the car. The driver, who had been watching the scene unfold in the rearview mirror, glanced back, his eyes wide with uncertainty. Clara met his gaze with a glare that silenced any questions. "Drive," she ordered, her voice cold and unyielding. The driver hesitated only for a moment before nodding, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he pulled away from the curb, merging back into the steady flow of traffic. Clara slid into the seat beside the woman, her eyes scanning her with open disdain. "I don't know who you think you are," she began, her voice low and dripping with malice. "But you don't get to walk around this city acting like you belong in our world. You're just another nobody who thinks a little decency earns you respect. It doesn't. Power does. Money does. And you have neither." The woman turned her head to face Clara, her eyes meeting hers with a calmness that was almost unnerving. "Maybe you're right," she replied softly, her voice steady and unwavering. "But respect is something you earn, not something you buy." Clara's laugh was sharp and bitter, filling the confined space of the car. "Spoken like someone who's never had anything," she scoffed, crossing her legs and smoothing her dress, as if to emphasize her superiority. "You don't get it, do you? This world doesn't care about your virtues. It cares about your power, your influence. Without that, you're invisible. Like you." The woman did not respond, her gaze returning to the window as the city blurred past. Her silence only served to deepen Clara's disdain, her fingers tapping restlessly against the leather seat. Clara thrived on conflict, on the satisfaction of seeing her enemies cower. But this woman, this nobody, refused to react, refused to acknowledge Clara's superiority. It was maddening. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating, until finally, Clara could bear it no longer. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that was laced with venom. "You don't belong here," she hissed, her eyes fixed on the woman's profile. "People like you never do." The woman turned, her gaze steady and unyielding, and for the first time, Clara saw something flicker in her eyes, something unspoken, something powerful. "Maybe," the woman replied, her voice soft but sure. "But neither do people like you." The words hung between them, sharp and deliberate, and for the first time, Clara found herself without a response. The car continued its journey through the city, the tension simmering between them, unspoken but undeniable. Clara's life returned to its glittering routine after the encounter with the woman she had tossed out of Daniel's car. Her days were filled with shopping sprees at high-end boutiques, luncheons with friends who adored her sharp tongue, and late-night dinners where she flaunted her connection to Daniel. The memory of the woman she'd humiliated barely lingered in her mind. She was merely another nameless face in the sea of ordinary people Clara considered beneath her. Westbury was her playground, and she moved through it with the confidence of someone who believed the world owed her luxury and admiration. But beneath the surface of her glamorous life, Clara began to notice subtle changes. Daniel, once attentive and eager to please her, seemed more distracted, his phone calls growing longer, his availability shrinking with each passing day. At first, she brushed it off, attributing his absence to work and the pressures of running a successful business. But soon, the excuses became too frequent, and the time he spent away from her grew longer. Her calls often went unanswered, and when he did pick up, his voice was distant, curt, as though she were an afterthought. Clara's instinct sharpened, her mind churning with suspicion and doubt. She had always prided herself on her ability to read people, to know when things were amiss. Daniel's behavior was off, and she was determined to find out why. Her friends, always eager for a morsel of gossip, speculated wildly over their champagne-filled brunches. "Maybe he's seeing someone else," one of them whispered conspiratorially, her eyes glittering with excitement at the thought of scandal. Clara scoffed, waving away the suggestion with a flick of her manicured hand. "Please," she retorted, her voice dripping with disdain. "Daniel wouldn't dare. He knows what he has with me." But even as she spoke, the seed of doubt had been planted, its roots spreading through her thoughts, wrapping around her confidence like vines strangling a tree. She began to watch him more closely, noting the times he came home late, the way he guarded his phone more than usual, the secretive smiles that crept onto his face when he thought she wasn't watching. One evening, Clara's suspicions reached a boiling point. Daniel had promised to take her to a charity gala in Westbury's most prestigious hotel. It was the kind of event that Clara thrived in, an opportunity to showcase her beauty, her style, and her position by Daniel's side. But hours before the event, Daniel called, his voice hurried and apologetic. "Something's come up at work," he explained, his tone uncharacteristically tense. "I can't make it tonight." Clara's hand tightened around her phone, her knuckles whitening. "You're canceling," she repeated, disbelief coloring her tone. "We've been planning this for weeks, Daniel." His sigh crackled through the receiver, heavy with frustration. "I know, Clara, but it's important. I'll make it up to you." Before she could protest further, the line went dead, leaving her standing alone in her lavishly decorated living room, her reflection in the ornate mirror across the room, revealing her disbelief and growing rage. She tossed her phone onto the velvet sofa, pacing back and forth, her heels clicking against the marble floor with every step. This was not like Daniel. He had always been attentive, always eager to keep her happy. Something had changed, and she intended to find out what. Determined to uncover the truth, Clara made a decision. She called in a favor from one of her friends who worked at Daniel's office, a woman named Linda who had always been eager to gossip. Over coffee the next day, Clara leaned in, her eyes sharp and unyielding. "I need you to find out what Daniel's been up to," she whispered, her voice low and firm. Linda raised an eyebrow, curiosity gleaming in her eyes. "You think he's cheating?" Clara's jaw clenched, her perfectly lined lips pressing into a thin line. "I think he's hiding something," she corrected. "And I want to know what." Linda nodded, her fingers tapping on the edge of her cup. "I'll see what I can find out," she promised, her voice laced with intrigue. Clara leaned back, a satisfied smile creeping onto her face. She had always known how to get what she wanted, how to pull the right strings to unravel secrets. It was only a matter of time before she had her answers. Days turned into weeks, and Clara's patience wore thin. Every unanswered call, every late-night excuse, every lingering glance Daniel cast at his phone only fueled her suspicions. Linda, true to her word, began feeding Clara bits of information. Daniel had been taking more business lunches than usual, disappearing for hours with no clear explanation. He had started leaving the office earlier, only to return hours later with no mention of where he had been. Clara's mind raced with possibilities, her imagination painting vivid pictures of betrayal and deceit. She replayed their conversations in her mind, searching for hidden meanings, for clues she might have missed. Her obsession grew, consuming her thoughts, leaving little room for anything else. She found herself driving past Daniel's office, watching the entrance with a hawk's eye, waiting for him to emerge with some woman draped on his arm. But each time she left disappointed, her suspicions unconfirmed but not extinguished. Finally, Linda called with news. Clara sat up in her silk-covered bed, her heart hammering with anticipation as Linda's voice crackled through the phone. "He's meeting someone tonight," Linda whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "At the Regal Room, 8 o'clock. Clara's fingers tightened around the phone, her mind racing with possibilities. "Who is it?" she demanded, her voice edged with impatience. Linda hesitated, her voice dropping even lower. "I don't know," she admitted, "but he made the reservation himself. It's under his name." Clara's lips curled into a smile, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Finally, she had what she needed. That evening, she dressed with meticulous care, her reflection in the mirror a testament to her confidence and beauty. She wore a deep crimson gown that clung to her curves, her hair swept back into a sleek bun, her makeup flawless. She wanted to be seen, to make a statement. Daniel would know she was there, and so would whoever he was meeting. As she arrived at the Regal Room, Clara's heels clicked against the polished marble floors, her entrance turning heads as she swept through the doors. Her eyes scanned the room with practiced ease, her gaze settling on the corner booth where Daniel sat, his back to her. He was laughing, his shoulders relaxed, his hand resting casually on the table. But it wasn't his ease that caught Clara's attention. It was the woman seated across from him. Her hair was neatly styled, her posture straight and elegant, her smile serene and confident. Clara's breath caught in her throat, her pulse quickening as recognition settled in. It was her, the woman from the street, the one she had humiliated without a second thought. And there she was, sitting with Daniel, her presence as unbothered and graceful as it had been that day on the sidewalk. Clara's fists clenched at her sides, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her palms as she watched them laugh, their conversation flowing with an ease that made her stomach turn. The realization settled over her like a dark cloud. This woman was not just anyone. She was someone important. And Clara, for the first time, found herself utterly unprepared for what came next. Clara could barely contain her rage as she stormed out of the restaurant, her heels striking the polished marble with a fury that echoed through the grand lobby. Her mind raced with questions, her heart pounding with disbelief and anger. How could Daniel be sitting so comfortably with that woman? The same woman she had humiliated on the sidewalk, the one she had pushed into the back of the car like she was nothing more than an inconvenience. And yet there she was, poised, elegant, and completely at ease with Daniel. Clara's hands shook as she fumbled for her car keys, her vision blurred with the sting of humiliation. She slammed the car door behind her, her fingers gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. Her reflection in the rearview mirror stared back at her, eyes wide with disbelief and lips parted in shock. For the first time, Clara felt the icy grip of doubt wrap around her heart. Who was this woman? And why was Daniel so comfortable with her? The drive back to her apartment was a blur of red lights and honking horns, but Clara barely noticed. Her mind was consumed with thoughts of that evening, of the way Daniel had laughed so easily in the woman's presence, his hand resting on the table mere inches from hers. There had been an intimacy there, a familiarity that made Clara's stomach turn with dread. She replayed their encounter on the sidewalk over and over in her mind, dissecting every word, every look, every dismissive gesture she had thrown at the woman. Had she missed something? Was there some clue, some hint of who she really was? Clara's fingers tightened around the steering wheel as she considered the possibilities. Her thoughts churned with suspicion and paranoia, each scenario darker and more unsettling than the last. Had Daniel been seeing her all along? Was she just another pawn in his game of deception? The questions gnawed at her, unraveling the threads of her confidence with each passing second. By the time she reached her apartment, Clara's mind was a whirlwind of fury and confusion. She slammed the car door shut, her heels clicking furiously against the pavement as she stalked toward the entrance. Her thoughts were a tangled mess of jealousy and rage, her heart hammering in her chest with each step she took. Inside, the opulent surroundings that once brought her comfort now felt suffocating. The plush carpets, the gilded mirrors, the crystal chandeliers, all seemed to mock her ignorance, reflecting back her desperation and insecurity. Clara dropped her purse onto the marble countertop, her hands shaking as she poured herself a glass of wine. The liquid swirled in the glass, crimson and rich, but she barely tasted it as she downed the first sip. Her mind was too occupied, too frantic to focus on anything but the image of Daniel and that woman, laughing together, as if they shared some secret that she could never be a part of. Clara paced the room, her heels sinking into the plush carpet with each step. Her mind raced through every interaction she'd had with Daniel over the past few months, searching for clues she might have missed. His late nights, his distant stares, the phone calls he took in hushed tones. Had it all been for her? Had she been sitting on the sidelines while that woman stole her place, inch by inch, right under her nose? The thought was enough to make her blood boil, her grip tightening on the wine glass until she feared it might shatter. Clara's eyes darted to her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed Daniel's number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. Clara's jaw clenched, her teeth grinding together as she ended the call and tossed the phone onto the couch. He was avoiding her. He had to be. There was no other explanation for his silence, for his sudden absence from her life. Clara's chest heaved with frustration, her eyes burning with the sting of betrayal. She would not be made a fool of, not by Daniel, not by that woman. The next morning, Clara woke with a resolve that burned hot and fierce in her chest. She dressed with precision, her movements sharp and deliberate, as she slipped into a tailored black dress and a pair of red heels that clicked with authority as she moved. Her reflection in the mirror was flawless, every hair in place, every lash perfectly curled. She was determined to get answers, and nothing would stand in her way. Clara drove to Daniel's office, her hands gripping the steering wheel with a force that turned her knuckles white. The city blurred past her, buildings and cars fading into nothingness as she focused solely on her destination. When she arrived, she barely acknowledged the receptionist's greeting, her heels clicking furiously against the polished marble floors as she made her way to Daniel's office. His secretary, a meek woman with wide eyes and a nervous smile, rose from her desk, her hands wringing together. "He's in a meeting," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Clara's gaze fixed on her, unblinking and unyielding. "I don't care," she replied, her voice cold and unfeeling. "I'm going in." Without waiting for a response, Clara pushed open the heavy wooden doors, her eyes scanning the room with the sharpness of a hawk. Daniel sat at his desk, his eyes wide with surprise as Clara stormed in. Beside him, seated with an air of calm elegance, was the woman, the same woman she had humiliated on the sidewalk, the one who had laughed with Daniel at the restaurant, as if they shared a lifetime of secrets. Clara's breath caught in her throat, her eyes narrowing as she stepped forward. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice sharp and laced with disbelief. Daniel rose from his chair, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Clara," he began, his voice calm and measured, "I was going to tell you." Clara's eyes darted between him and the woman, her fists clenched at her sides. "Tell me what?" she spat, her voice rising with every word. "That you're seeing her. That you brought this nobody into our lives." The woman stood then, her movements graceful and controlled, her eyes meeting Clara's with a calmness that sent a chill down her spine. "I'm hardly a nobody," she replied, her voice soft but unwavering. Clara's eyes flashed with contempt, her lips curling into a sneer. "Oh, and who exactly are you?" The woman smiled then, a slow, deliberate smile that held no malice, only certainty. "I'm the owner of this company," she replied, her eyes never leaving Clara's. "And Daniel works for me." The silence that followed was deafening, stretching between them like a chasm that could not be crossed. Clara's mind reeled, her gaze darting between the woman and Daniel, searching for any sign that this was some elaborate joke. But there was none. The woman's expression was serene, her posture steady and unyielding. Daniel's eyes remained fixed on the floor, his shoulders slumped with resignation. Clara's breath came in shallow bursts, her hands shaking at her sides as the weight of the revelation settled upon her. The woman, this stranger she had humiliated and dismissed, was not just a passing face in Daniel's life. She was his employer, his superior. And Clara, in her arrogance, had thrown her out of a car like she was nothing. Clara's fists clenched, her knuckles whitening with the force of her grip as she tried to steady her breathing. But the humiliation was too fresh, the sting too sharp to ignore. For the first time in her life, Clara found herself standing on the edge of despair, teetering dangerously close to the realization that she had been nothing more than a pawn in a game far beyond her control. Clara's world crumbled beneath her feet, the realization crashing over her with the force of a tidal wave. She stood there, motionless, as the weight of her own arrogance settled heavily on her shoulders. Her eyes, usually sharp and full of disdain, were now wide with disbelief, flickering back and forth between Daniel and Mary. Mary, the woman she had so carelessly humiliated. The woman she had tossed into the back of the car, as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience, was not just someone in Daniel's life, she was his boss. Not just any boss, but the owner of the company. Clara's mind scrambled for explanations, for any possible way this could be untrue. But the calm look on Mary's face, the silent nod from Daniel, and the resignation in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for the first time in a long time, Clara felt genuinely afraid. The walls of Daniel's office seemed to close in around her, suffocating her with their grandeur, mocking her with every ornate detail she once admired. Her throat tightened, her hands shaking as she struggled to find her voice. But nothing came out. The silence stretched, heavy and oppressive, pressing down on her like a weight she couldn't shake. Mary watched her with an unreadable expression, her eyes steady and unyielding. There was no satisfaction, no smugness in her gaze, just a calm, collected certainty that Clara found unsettling. It was as if she had already won, as if Clara's presence was nothing more than a mild inconvenience, a minor obstacle that had already been overcome. Clara's cheeks burned with humiliation, her nails digging into her palms as she forced herself to stand tall. She would not crumble, not here, not in front of Mary. This is a joke, she stammered, her voice cracking under the strain of her own disbelief. Mary's expression did not change. She merely raised an eyebrow, her hands clasped in front of her with a grace that made Clara's rage flare even hotter. I assure you, it's not, Mary replied, her voice smooth and composed. I own this company. Daniel works for me. And from what I understand, you were under the impression that you had some sort of authority. I think you now see that was a misunderstanding. The words were delivered with such precision, such calm confidence, that Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She glanced at Daniel, desperate for some sign of support, but his eyes were cast downward, his hands clasped together, as if he were praying for the floor to swallow him whole. The silence stretched between them, thick and unyielding, until finally, Clara could bear it no longer. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, and she forced her voice to remain steady. I don't understand, she said, her eyes darting back to Mary. If you own the company, why were you walking on the street that day? Why were you dressed like that? Mary's lips curled into a small smile, one that did not reach her eyes. I believe in understanding the world outside of luxury, she replied simply. I make it a point to walk the streets of my city, to understand the people who live in it. You'd be surprised what you learn when you're not shielded by tinted windows and chauffeurs. The words struck Clara with the force of a hammer, chipping away at the carefully constructed walls of superiority she had built around herself. Her mind replayed that day on the sidewalk, the way Mary had walked with such dignity, even as Clara had sneered and belittled her. Clara's cheeks flushed with the memory, the sting of humiliation sharp and unrelenting. She had assumed Mary was just another nobody, another insignificant soul that she could trample over without consequence. But now, standing in this office, surrounded by the symbols of Mary's power, Clara realized just how wrong she had been. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow, its taste lingering long after the initial shock had passed. Clara straightened her shoulders, her eyes narrowing as she tried to regain some semblance of control. Well, she began, her voice strained but steady, I suppose you've had your fun, humiliating me, parading your power in front of me. Congratulations, but this isn't over. Mary raised an eyebrow, her expression unchanging. I'm not sure what you mean, she replied calmly. There's nothing to be over. This is simply the truth, and sometimes the truth is uncomfortable. Her gaze never wavered, never faltered, and Clara felt her resolve begin to crack under the weight of it. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to throw accusations and demand explanations, but deep down, she knew there was nothing she could say that would change what had happened. Mary had won, not through manipulation or deceit, but through simple, undeniable power. Clara's hands shook at her sides, her jaw clenched with the effort to hold back the torrent of emotion, threatening to spill over. But Mary saw it, Clara knew she did, and she hated her for it. The silence that filled the room was heavy, suffocating, stretching out between them like an unspoken declaration of victory. Mary's gaze never wavered, her posture never faltered. She stood there, tall and unyielding, the very embodiment of grace under pressure. Clara, on the other hand, felt the walls close in around her, the air growing thicker with each passing second. Her mind raced, searching for a way out, a means to claw back some sense of dignity. But there was none. Mary had taken that from her the moment she revealed who she truly was. Clara's eyes flickered back to Daniel, searching for some sign of loyalty, some spark of the connection they once shared. But he remained silent, his gaze fixed on the floor, his hands still clasped together in front of him. There was no support there, no comfort, only silence. And in that silence, Clara realized that she was truly alone. She had built her world on illusions of power and control, but with one revelation, Mary had shattered it all. Clara turned on her heel, her movements sharp and deliberate as she stormed out of the office. The heavy wooden doors swung shut behind her with a resounding thud, the sound echoing through the hallway like a final declaration of her defeat. Her heels clicked against the polished marble floor, each step carrying her farther away from the scene of her humiliation. But even as she walked away, The sting of Mary's words lingered, etched into her memory with a permanence that she could not shake. Clara's mind raced with thoughts of revenge, of redemption, of regaining the power she had so recklessly lost. But beneath it all, simmering just below the surface, was a fear she could not ignore. The fear that Mary was right, that her arrogance had blinded her, that she had been nothing more than a pawn in a game she never truly understood. The thought terrified her, but she pushed it aside, her jaw set with determination. Clara Sanders was not one to accept defeat, not now, not ever.